All right, Princeton High School Health Careers class. We are back here with another recreation of our guest speaker experience. And our guest is Ashlee from Fairview, Northland, just across the street here. So I'm going to go right into our first question. Ashlee, I'm not going to give you too much of an introduction because I want you to tell us about yourself. But our first question is always the basic first job interview question. Can you tell us about your educational background and how you got to where you are right now?
Yes. So I am a certified occupational therapist. I started out at Anoka Tech. I got my 2-year degree in occupational therapy. So the title for that is CODA. And then I worked in the field for about 4.5 years before I went back to school at St. Catherine's University to get my master's degree in occupational therapy. Um, my journey was not like typical for most OTs. Most people will do their undergrad and then go straight into the master's degree program. But for me, it was a little different because, sorry, dog barking in the background. um, I got my associate's degree first. Sorry, I'll be right back.
Okay.
Real life. This is COVID.
Yeah, no kidding.
So I got my associate's degree. So when I went back to get my master's, they have programs out there where you can bridge your degree. So because I had the associate's degree, I could start the master's program before getting my actual bachelor's degree. So it kind of shortened my time. But because I did my associates at tech school, some of my classes didn't transfer. So I had to retake a few. So it ended up being about the same length of time. But it really helped having that fieldwork experience, like being in the field before getting my master's.
Can I ask where you did that field experience?
Actually just working. So I worked as a CODA for 4.5 years. And
Where did you do that? Like, where were you employed?
so I worked for Health Dimensions Rehab, which is like a small private outpatient pediatrics clinic. Um, I was in Cambridge, and then I also did like contracting in with the Head Start programs in St. Paul. So as I was an outpatient therapist working in the Head Start programs, but I worked and collaborated with the St. Paul Public School District. So I got to see a little bit of that too before I went back to school. So I kind of had an idea that I might work in the schools one day. Um, so I had a few jobs in between actually going back to get my master's degree. So I worked at HDR, and then I started working at another small private clinic. And then I went to another small private outpatient pediatrics clinic. So I worked with kids. And I had been at that location for about 5 years, and I actually contracted into a school district. So having just my associate's degree, you have to have like a supervisor over you. So someone who has their master's or doctorate degree needs to follow you, and they make the plan of care. So essentially, I'd go in and treat the kids, but they would be like the guiders of what we were doing in therapy. So I'll explain that a little bit more, I guess, with some of the other questions.
Yeah. So, your educational background, you said Anoka Ramsey or Anoka Tech, and then
Yep.
St. Kate. Can you tell us about your professional experiences? So you've already kind of summarized a few of those initial ones, but could you kind of give us a brief history of your professional experiences related to health careers?
So when I was at Anoka Tech, I always knew I wanted to do pediatrics. Um, the reason why I got into OT, I might be jumping the gun here, but the reason why I got into occupational therapy is when I was in high school, my friend's little sister got in a car accident and she was not wearing her seatbelt. So always wear your seatbelt. But she was flown from the car. They actually brought her to Gillette's Children's Hospital where she was in a coma for a little while. And when she came to, she had occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy. And I went and stayed with her. And the one therapy she was so excited to go to was OT. occupational therapy. And she didn't really ever want to go to PT because it was hard work. But when she went to occupational therapy, she was so excited because they used those things she loved to do to really work on the skills she needed to work on. So when she'd go there, I mean, she needed to work on moving her arms. So instead of just having her using a machine, they had her do crafting stuff. So she didn't even know she was working on the skills. And that's kind of what got me into it. When I was in 10th grade, I wanted to be a pilot. So glad I didn't do that. But after witnessing what they did in occupational therapy, I was like, that is what I want to do. She was so happy. She didn't even know she was doing the work, and they were so creative, and they got to make what she was doing. Like there wasn't like, you have to do this, this, and this. The OT would come in and she'd be like, what do you want to do today? And then she would change what they were doing to actually work on the skills. So it's kind of like creative problem solving, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's fine. I kind of love all these unique things that happen on Zooms and Google Hangouts and whatever. I think it spices things up a little bit. So just a quick follow-up question here. Could you kind of compare and contrast or differentiate between those? You mentioned 3 specific types of therapy. So occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy is what I heard. Could you kind of tell us, give us a basic summary of what is the difference between those 3 types of therapy?
Yes. So we collaborate as a team, and some of our areas overlap. But typically, I would say physical therapy is looking at like your walking and your musculature. So they're the ones that are like getting you moving, per se. And then speech therapy is going to help with cognition. So like word finding, articulation, so speaking, social pragmatics, so how you interact in different social situations. And then OT and speech also does feeding therapy. But for occupational therapy, we look at anything that occupies your time. So whether that's feeding, dressing, bathing, playing. For kids, that's their job. Playing, being able to interact with other kids. Same thing for adults. A lot of those areas overlap for pediatrics and adults. It's just slightly different. For adults, we're looking at work, not play. But we can also work on play too.
Right.
So we kind of have our own little niches, and we have a different lens at how we look at the situation or look at the person. But we collaborate together because sometimes you need both OT and PT because we want to get them walking. But from like an OT standpoint, I'm looking at like they need to be able to walk to get to the bathroom, or they need to be able to stand at the kitchen to make their food. For a kid, I want them to be able to get out on the playground. So physical therapy is going to work on like the actual walking, where occupational therapy is going to work on like using different tasks to motivate them to get walking.
Okay.
So sometimes we'll co-treat, like we'll be in the therapy session together, addressing almost the same things, but in different ways.
So could you tell us, could you give us a job description of your current position? You're an occupational therapist, and can you tell us where you do that and, what that looks like?
Yes, so I am an occupational therapist at Health Fairview. My role's a little different, so I wear a lot of different hats. I do pediatrics there, which is outpatient. And I should probably identify. So outpatient, the people come to us, where inpatient, they are staying at the hospital. So I also do inpatient, where I will go up and see any of the patients that are currently in the hospital. And then I do hand therapy as well. So anyone with specific hand injuries, I see patients with concussions, which is, I feel like, a bigger thing. There's more research on that. And then we do feeding therapy as well, which I am working towards doing in the clinic. But I go all over in the hospital. So I'm seeing everyone from birth to 100. I'm seeing all the different conditions. We also do vision therapy specifically. We do pre-driving screens. So if someone had a stroke and they want to get back to driving, we'll look at all of those skills needed. We'll break down the tasks for driving, and really assess each piece of that to make sure they'd be safe.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing all that. So the next question I previewed with you a little bit before we started recording, but the lead up is Princeton High School has partnered with a few area businesses, Fairview being one of them. And what we asked these businesses to do was start identifying some soft skills. So soft skills aren't necessarily the skills, the tangible skills you need to do everyday work, but things like communication, teamwork, self-management, critical thinking, and accountability. So if you could just kind of go through that list and tell me what that looks like as an actual employee of Fairview, and I'm in the process of typing them through in the chat right now, so you don't have to memorize them, but
Okay.
you'll see them pop up here in a second. But if you could just start with like communication and collaboration, what does that look like as an actual employee of Fairview?
Collaboration's huge. To go before even working, you will collaborate a lot in college in general. I feel like that's a huge thing. Most of our assignments were group assignments because they want you to learn those skills and they're so important. So fast forward to actually working in the field, I have to communicate with speech therapists, physical therapists, nursing staff, doctors. And it's very important to have that ability to disagree about things, but not be upset about it. So you need to be flexible. You need to be able to be open to hear what other people are saying and be able to communicate what you want as well. It's important in our role because sometimes people don't understand what occupational therapy is. So even being able to advocate for why a patient would need OT. Another side of therapy is we also deal with insurance companies. So insurance companies will see our eval report and they can deny that patient having services. So sometimes we have to be more clear and direct with why that patient would benefit from therapy services. So we will use a lot of collaboration out in the field and communication. And then for teamwork, as I said, we work as a team. You're not independent from anyone else. We're all working together. I love the team I work with. I feel like they're really good at reaching out. So if a patient that they're seeing sparks like, oh, they might benefit from OT, that teammate will come talk to me and be like, hey, I have this patient. These are the things I'm noticing. Do you think that that would be an appropriate referral? So just having that ability to communicate with each other is going to have better outcomes for our patients. Self-management is huge. We have so much paperwork to keep up on. We joke because as a CODA, so when I had my associate's degree, I didn't do as much paperwork. When you have your master's degree and it are the OT that's on the plan, you have to do all of the paperwork, which we do documentation about every 10th visit. We do a new progress notes. We talk about their patient's goals and progress, and that goes to the insurance and the doctors. So you have to be on top of that because there's nothing that's going to flag you. You need to be aware of where you are in each person's plan. I see critical thinking, accountability. Really, you are your own person in therapy. You will have managers that are following you and are there to help you, but you're basically on your own, doing your own work, creating your own plan. So you need to keep yourself.
Yeah, so definitely all these skills are related, and I appreciated you mentioned critical thinking already once before. Even we brought it up because you talked about the creativity and coming up with rehab plans for the patients that you're working with. So definitely that would be an important skill. Next question. The kids always wonder. They want to know like what's a typical day like in your profession. So as an occupational therapist at Fairview, if you have a typical day or just daily tasks, can you describe what that's like?
I feel like I don't have a typical day. It varies, which is where those soft skills come into, like you need to be flexible. So typically I go into work and I can see my patient caseload for the day. And then I also do inpatient therapy. So I have to check and see who's a new admit and then what is going on and what their plan would be. So I typically have around, I would say, 8 to 13 patients in a day. And I'm seeing those patients from 30 minutes to an hour, depending on who they are and what their needs are. But typically, the schedulers will, or the front desk staff will check a patient in, and I'll go grab them and bring them back to a room where we will assess their needs. So typically, I have goals. The best part about my job is I essentially get to hang out with people all day and do things they love to do and teach them new skills or teach them how to compensate. So if someone wants to go bow hunting, but they can't pull back a bow. So for me, I'm using, as an OT, we're trained for activity analysis. So we will break down that task. So using a bow, we will look at what muscles, how much strength they need, their positioning, what the grip looks like. We break down that task, and then we try to find ways to work on those things without using the bow. So I could go grab a TheraBand and we'd pull back a lighter TheraBand and really just work through that. So that's what my sessions typically look like. For a pediatric patient, it looks like play. And I usually have to explain to my parents after an eval that we will be playing. Because when they come in, they're like, all you guys are doing is playing. Like, I wanted them to work on handwriting. So that's where I get to be really excited about, like, this is why you come to OT, because we're going to make it so fun they don't know they're working. And so you'll see us like climbing the rock wall, working on hand strengthening, like just things you wouldn't normally think about, we get to do and have fun with. So I love it.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, we were able to tour the rehabilitation services, and we saw that room where the kids get to hang out and play, and there is lots of really cool stuff in there. So I'm a little jealous that you get to do that.
Yes, we have physical therapists that come in the gym and they're like, I want to play. I want to play all day. I'm like, we'll come to the peds side.
Yeah, there was lots of fun
But
stuff
yeah,
in there.
that's one thing I love about our job. It's not boring.
Yeah, that's I get that answer quite often, and I keep reminding the kids that even though they want to know what a typical day is like or what people's job responsibilities are, a lot of times when you're in healthcare, it's kind of like teaching where there's not really a typical day, even though for me, the bell rings and the kids move and we have class periods the schedule is the same, but every class period and every kid is very, very different. So it definitely keeps us on our toes. Next on the list, I know I previewed this with you a little bit, but I kind of want to give you a lead in here. So the first thing we did in class is we watched a parable called Who Moved My Cheese? And it's kind of a goofy, it's about the goofiest YouTube video you could ever find. It's about a couple of mice and a couple of humans that are racing to find their cheese. But really at the heart of it, it's a parable about change and how change is going to happen. It's the only consistent thing in life, really. So the first example I gave the kids was I asked them to think about their 8th grade year. So I have mostly juniors and seniors in this class. And so 8th grade maybe feels like a long time ago for them, but it's recent enough where they remember what their mindset was about coming to high school. And then I asked them to think about their thinking right now and how that's changed. And the light bulb went on for them. They're like, holy smokes, it's really not as bad as I thought it was going to be. People are actually nice. I didn't get stuffed in a locker. I didn't get a swirly. The homework, once I figure out how to manage my time, it's not that bad. So our current learning conditions obviously are significantly different. I had never heard of Zoom until 6 or 8 months ago. I've never done a conference like this, and now I've done almost 20 of them with our guest speakers. So there's a significant amount of change, and so really what I am asking from our guest speakers is if they can share a change in attitude or something that's changed that's impacted you positively or negatively, but if you could kind of give us some examples or thoughts on change for you professionally.
Lots of change. So I actually have anxiety. I'm diagnosed with that. And change can be hard with anxiety because I always fear the worst. You don't know what's coming. And with my job, every day I go in, I mean, I could have an overload of patients or I can have patients cancel on me, which makes me feel nervous. But I've learned to understand you can't foreshadow what's going to happen. You can only think what you think may happen. We always fear the worst. But you also can't go back in time and change what already happened. So like in that moment, it will be okay. We all have those skills. We all can problem solve and figure out what we need to do next when problems or change occurs. And with change too, there's so many positives that can come out of that you might not even know could have happened. I know there's a lot of fear right now with the COVID situation, and even being at work, we now wear masks and we have face shields every single day. We're in fear of never knowing, are we going to shut down again? Are we going to have to do telehealth? But there's so many more positives that come from that. Like, yeah, we don't like that change, but now we're learning that telehealth's an option. We have so many patients that are homebound even before COVID happened, and that was never an option because insurance wouldn't cover it. Now they do. So even though we don't like the change and it's not our favorite thing to do, we just found a way to help someone else. And I feel like change is inevitable, like you said, like the only constant thing. But change also brings growth and new things, and every day is going to be different. So you can't, with anxiety, you always want to expect the worst and think about what's happening next. But I've really learned with COVID just to stay in the moment and take things as they come. There's no use to waste all that energy freaking out about what's going to happen. Like, you don't know what's going to happen. So you just have to take it as it comes.
Yeah.
And like high school to college, I know that's a huge leap when people are like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be on my own. I don't know what to do. You just take it as it comes, and you can't really, you can plan for it, but you never know what's going to happen. So
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, especially, sharing some personal things about your anxiety. I know that there's lots of kids that would be able to relate to that. And, you're a great example of how successful you can be and how you can overcome that adversity. So thank you for sharing that. That means a lot to me, and it means a lot to the kids, I know for sure. So that leads me to my next question, and you definitely have started to hit on some your vocational journey. So vocation is simply the feeling of a passion towards your profession. And it definitely shows up how passionate you are about what you're doing. But could you kind of just describe your vocational journey and maybe unpack your vocational journey for us a little bit?
yeah, so I feel like internally I'm a very passionate person to begin with, and I'm more of a caregiver. So when I was younger, I would always, in high school, I would always go to the special ed area and help out, volunteer to help reading, just hang out in there. And then I also have an uncle who has cerebral palsy. So he has some different abilities. And I've always kind of felt like that's just normal. That's never been different for me. Um, so I feel like I kind of was led to occupational therapy just because of what my passion is. Like, I want to help people. I want people to feel like they can do things that most people tell them they can't. Like in my job, I hear a lot of, makes me kind of emotional. um, Doctors will tell parents, like, your kid will never ride a bike. And it's like, how they can't say that because there's ways around it. So I've actually reached out to several companies. There's adaptive bikes out there. So there's companies that will come in and fit a child for a 3-wheeled bike and get them the proper positioning tools so that they can sit and ride a bike, so they can go for a bike ride with their families. So I feel like that's where my passion is about occupational therapy and like why I do what I do. Like, I come in every day and I don't know who I'm going to see for a patient, or what their ability is going to be, but I love to hear their story and then help them find their way. Some people will be like, oh, I'll never be able to write. Like, I see adults after a stroke. I just don't think I'll be able to write again. I'm like, we'll find a way. So it's really exciting to help other people. Like, it makes me happy when they're happy, or when a kid learns a new thing. I have emotional parents sometimes that are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they just did that. They've never done that before. Like, I'm like, yes, like this is what I do and this is why I do it. Like that feeling you get. I mean, you can't even put a price tag on that. It's
Yeah,
such a
you're talking about a whole bunch of vocational concepts, and really that's the most important thing for me, is to get these high school kids to start thinking about vocation rather than just a job or a profession, because they want to know how much money people make and how many hours they work in a typical day. But really, at the end of the day, if you can leave your job, your profession, with the feelings that you're describing, that's what the most important thing is. And you're kind of on the front line of that. You get to see some really cool things, and you get to see some light bulbs go on, and some kids, adults learning some skills, relearning some skills. And that's an awfully rewarding thing. And that's what's really, really important, in my opinion. And it sounded like you had some personal experiences beforehand that kind of formed your vocational journey and in your path towards occupational therapy. And if you're comfortable sharing some of that, are you willing to share some of that story with us?
yeah. Like what do you?
Well, I'm just, you mentioned your friend had some occupational therapy
Oh yeah.
experience. If you're willing to share, to just rewind and share a little bit more of that story.
Yeah. So she originally did not have use of her arms. She had very minimal movement with her arms. She was in a wheelchair when she first started out. She had a really hard time. She was 14. So she had a really hard time understanding what was going on with her. So it was a long journey. So I started out learning what OT was from her being in Gillette. Fast forward a couple years, I actually became her PCA. A personal care attendant. So I actually would go to her house every day and help her with her daily tasks that she needed done. So like I would help her get her toothbrush ready. I would take her to appointments. I would help her get dressed in the morning. But she was very depressed at that time as well. So a lot of it was just like validating her feelings. Like, yeah, that's a really crappy situation you're in. Like, what can we do today to make you feel better? Or what can we do to give you something to live for? And being young and having that happen, I mean, it's really hard. I think about it. I'm like, I don't know how I would have dealt with it. But she also would be like, I don't want to go to therapy because this is just where I'm at. So I actually would bring her to therapy and I would make her sit in the therapy room until her therapy time was over. Even if she refused to participate, I'm like, we're sitting here. This is your scheduled therapy time. You're going to sit here until therapy is over. Eventually she would start engaging because I'm like, you can sit here or you can do what they want you to do. Eventually she started doing her therapy again, and she actually now has 2 children, and she can walk and she can live a full life. She could have a job, she can do whatever she wants to do. She does have some different abilities. She can't move her hand like this, but who needs to do that? Like, as long as you can brush your teeth, brush your hair, make yourself some food, do those things she wants to do. And it's really cool to see to her journey. So I feel like a lot of what I do is because of her, like just seeing what she's gone through and seeing the things that happen. And another thing is taking her out into the community. I know she had a hard time with people staring at her because she was so young and in a wheelchair. And I mean, she looked different. And in the beginning, she would be really upset and she would actually yell at people. So there was an older woman looking at her at Walmart and she ended up yelling at her. And I was like, you need to take a step back. I'm like, when you see people in a wheelchair, you also are staring at them, wondering what's going on. So we kind of talked together and decided that it would be a good thing for her to explain why she was in a wheelchair. So when she felt upset someone was looking at her, she would be like, can I tell you my story? Which was also really cool and helps me in my career too, because people are curious. They want to know that. So when I have kids in the back working with them for therapy and they see an adult walk by with a walker or a wheelchair or just walking different. And they're like, why do they do that? I'm like, ask them about it. You can go up and ask them. If they don't feel comfortable, they'll say, I don't want to talk about it, or I'll intervene if I need to. But it's just, we're all human. We all have different abilities. It's just some you can visibly see are different and some you can't. So I even have patients that have a concussion and they don't look like they have any different abilities, but working with them, they have a hard time remembering things or coming up with words, or they just get easily overwhelmed by environments. So helping them learn how to communicate those two. So if they're on the phone with family members and they can't keep up with the conversation, how do you communicate that of like, hey, I need to take a break right now because I'm overwhelmed. But I think that's another really cool piece, and like makes me happy to do what I do, is because it helps everybody. I mean, even people who wouldn't consider they have a disability, when I was going through college, I'm pretty sure I have undiagnosed dyslexia. And so when I would read, I'd have to read the same thing 50 times compared to the person next to me who could read it quickly and have no issues. We all learn differently. Even looking at, are you an auditory learner, visual learner? We all have a different skill, different way of learning. So advocating for yourself. I know as a high school student, I would avoid speech day. I wouldn't go because I was so anxious. I literally would be like, I cannot get in front of the class and give a speech. But knowing that that's hard for me, now I push myself out of that comfort zone and I'm like, hey, I can do this. But we all have different abilities. Like I think it's kind of cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of want to rewind to something you mentioned about becoming a personal care assistant. Was that in high school when you did that?
Yes. So I started being a personal care attendant. I think I was 16 when I got my first job. And I actually was a PCA for like up until I finished my tech school. And that really helped with being in school, learning the medical terminology. So advice for high school students now, getting a job in healthcare in any way, shape, or form is beneficial. I was kind of jealous of my classmates who worked as CNAs in nursing homes because they already knew how to transfer patients, like physically transfer them. They already felt comfortable going in and being like, hi buddy, like this is who I am, I'm here to help you. Like that's something that you have to learn, another soft skill, being able to communicate with patients. A lot of my classmates felt more comfortable with that than I did. I was fine with the kids, but the adults, it's a different way of communicating.
Yeah, I'm a really big advocate for getting those experiences as early as possible, and a lot of people we talk to advocate for the same thing. So I'm really glad you brought up that you served as a PCA, because those are entry-level positions you can have in high school. We've talked to more than a handful of people that started as certified nursing assistants. We talked to somebody that works in the lab at Fairview that mentioned a few entry-level positions you can have even as a high school student. So thanks for bringing that up, because that's important things for those high school kids to have. Or to know about. Next on our list is a question about mentorship. So if you can think about somebody either professionally or personally that has that has mentored you or is or currently mentors you, and you're willing to share, you don't have to say a name specifically if you don't want to, but who's somebody you would consider a mentor?
I probably would say my first boss, as I came out of CODA school. She's older than I am, but she's been in the field for about 20 years when I met her. She was the one who actually kind of pushed me to go back to school to get my master's degree. I was fine being a CODA. I'm like, it's okay. I love what I do. And she was the one that was like, you need to go back. You deserve more money for what you're doing. You will be a great advocate for the services. You can have more job opportunities. And I still to this day will consult with her. So if something's happening at work, or I had a rocky road in school, which I should probably add to, so people know it's not just smooth sailing in college. But she's always been there. She's also my person that will put me in my place. So if I'm in the wrong or having something's going on, or basically she's there through the thick and thin. So if something happens, she's going to tell me honestly what is going on, her perspective, and how to navigate those situations. So when I was at St. Kate's, nothing bad about St. Kate's, loved going to school there, loved the professors. I just had, because my path was so different, they had a hard time connecting the dots on what I needed to complete to get into the program. I feel like I'm totally going into my life story here, but my GPA was not the highest. Like I said, academics is not really my thing. I'm a hands-on learner, and when it's not hands-on, it's very challenging. So starting at St. Kate's, they had pieced together my program so I could bridge into getting my master's degree, but they messed up. So I took a couple classes I didn't need. And then my GPA transferring in was not high enough to actually apply for the program, because at that point, I think it was like a 3.0 transferring in. And so they actually told me I should just not be an OT, which was very hard to hear because I was already working in the field. So my advisor at the time told me to switch my route and go to healthcare management. And so I did. And when I got to meet with the healthcare management, I think she was an advisor for them, she actually told me no. She's like, you need to go back and knock on that door until OT lets you into their program. So I'm so happy she said what she said, because otherwise I would have went to school for healthcare management and then had to go back for OT. So she saved me a lot of time and money. So I went back, and I also had a math teacher for statistics class who also was like, do not stray from your journey, go in for OT and keep going forward. So they have also kind of been my mentors, like indirectly. So I ended up staying the course and I got into the program. I actually had to apply saying that my grade transferring in was not high enough. And I had to do an extra petition paper and advocate for why my grades were not high enough and why I wanted to be in the program and why they should let me. And I actually was accepted based on that. And there's 400 applicants and they take 24, and I was accepted. So even though I like kept hitting those walls that were like, nope, not gonna work, like pushing through and keep going forward and finding people that can help you was ultimately what helped me get through school.
Yeah, I've heard about how selective that program is at St. Kate's, and there's also not much to choose from, I don't think, as far as OT, PT programs in the state of Minnesota. So, I just want to shout out a couple of things. Grit and growth mindset and determination, I think, are really, really important. And, you're a great example of that. And to make a connection, I think this is a great chance to connect vocation to what you're doing. Clearly you're passionate about what you're doing, because it's easy to see a roadblock and then, instead of trying to find a way around it, just turning around and going back to where you came from. But again, you found a way around it. You were passionate enough, determined enough. A great example of a growth mindset. So thanks for sharing that, because we had a guest speaker, one of our first ones actually said, don't let school get in the way of your education. I don't think I'd be a good teacher if I said grades aren't important, but they're not the most important thing. Finding experiences for yourself, developing a sense of vocation, developing a sense of passion. I would put all of those on top of a priority list before I just put GPA on there. So this is another great example of that. Just a clarifying question quick. You've used CODA, that term, a couple of times. Can you just clarify what that is? I would assume it's an acronym for something.
Yes. Healthcare loves their acronyms, and so CODA is a certified occupational therapy assistant.
Okay.
So that's what my title was when I had my associate's degree from the tech school. And now my title is an occupational therapist, registered, licensed, and certified. So lots of letters. So when you finish school, whether that's getting your associate's degree or your master's degree or your doctorate degree, you have to take a certification test. which costs about $600, and you can take it, I think, a couple times or as many times as you need to pass. But it's essentially like a boards test, and you have to pass that before you can be certified to then get your license to be working in the state. So that's an important piece to think about if anyone's thinking about doing the occupational therapy journey, physical therapy journey. I think nursing has their own boards. It's kind of like your way to prove that you know what you know. And a lot of that comes from your hands-on learning. So you'll go through school. We had many years of school. My master's program was 3 years. And at the end of those 3 years, you do 2 12-week rotations. So you're actually going in and working somewhere. And that's where you gain those like hands-on skills. You can read things from a book, but that's not real life. Things happen, people come in with many things going on. So that's really where you gain your skills and you like hone in on those communication skills. You learn about being organized, things like that. So those skills that you learn on the job will actually help with the boards at the end, because they're gonna want more of that like critical thinking on the boards. Like they will give you an example of a patient, and then you kind of break that down on like how you would evaluate them and how you would treat them. So for occupational therapy, when someone comes in for their first time, we do a full evaluation and look at the skills. We talk about what is important to them and what skills they want to work on and what things they want to get back to or learn to do. And then we do treatment, however long that takes, and if insurance covers it or if they're going to pay out of pocket. And then we will discharge them once they're ready to be discharged.
Okay. So one more clarifying question before I keep moving down our list here. Did you go straight from your associate's degree into a master's program? Is that
Nope, I actually worked in the field. So I worked in an outpatient clinic for 4.5 years. So then I started the program. I actually applied at St. Kate's and I got in for completing my undergrad. So I think I ended up completing 8 classes before I could actually apply to the actual master's program. And I kind of did it a little weird. I did the evening weekend online hybrid program. So my undergrad classes were all on the weekends or at night. So I actually worked full time. And then the master's program, I did the hybrid weekend, evening online. So I don't know if they have that currently right now, but essentially I worked full time as a coda. I don't recommend that. I think the school recommends staying under 20 hours, but for where I was and I've worked for so long, that work wasn't hard for me. It was easy. I loved it. That was kind of my outlet. So when I was in the master's program, our classes were Friday and Saturday in person every other weekend for about like 8 to 10 hours a day. And then the other weekends were all online. So it was kind of a good learning style for me because I know I'm not an auditory processor. So sitting in class to a lecture is not how I learn. So doing the hybrid program, I did a lot more of like reading research on my own. And then when we met in person, we did more hands-on tasks. So that was, it set me up for success because that's how I learned the best. But I know some people need that like daily, constant online structure. So.
Yeah. So you did complete a bachelor's degree in between your associates. So associate, bachelor's, master's.
So mine is, so I have the associates and then my bachelor's is in occupational science. So I had enough credits to have a bachelor's degree, but because I bridged, I have like a pretty general bachelor's, there's nothing specific. Like a lot of people will get their bachelor's in psychology or a bachelor's in arts or a bachelor's in exercise, sports, and science. So there's many different roads you can go with your bachelor's degree, which is also interesting for occupational therapy because everyone's a little different, and there's so many jobs you can have as an occupational therapist. We can do consultative work where we go into businesses and we're looking at ergonomic positioning. So making sure people are doing their job in a good body position so that they don't have work comp cases on their hands where people are being injured on the job. You can work in a hospital, you can work in a clinic, you can work in a private setting, you can work in a jail, you can work in, I mean, there's so many jobs you can do with your occupational therapy degree. So it's kind of cool to see the different backgrounds of people coming in from undergrad. So we had many different undergrad degrees coming into my program, and that's another place where you collaborate because some people have better skills in one area where other people have them in other areas. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So since there is such a wide variety of things you could be doing or places you could be working, could you unpack that a little bit and talk about, what might drive one person towards working in a hospital setting or a school setting or in a jail setting? You're at Fairview here in Princeton, so maybe just talk specifically about what led you down the specific path that you're on as far as like work environment.
Originally, I always thought I'd do an outpatient peds clinic. It's just a little bit more flexibility with the type of patients you are seeing and the different types of interventions you can be doing. But when I was going through to get my master's degree, one of my rotations was at M Health Fairview. And to be honest, I was so scared because I know the population's so big. Like there's such a variety there. So I was really nervous about that. But going to that placement opened my eyes about how much I love working with all the different kinds of people. So that's kind of why I actually chose a job there. I liked doing the hand therapy. I liked doing the pediatric therapy, which I already knew. But I also like the inpatient care too. But it's not for everyone. I think you kind of find your own niche. Some people will just do what feels comfortable, which is totally fine. I have other friends who are occupational therapists, and they actually had a fieldwork rotation at a nursing home. And so that's all they've ever done, and that's all they ever know. So they stay in a nursing home. I also have friends that are really into neuro. So they like to learn about the nerves, or they like to work with patients that have more higher level needs. So they'll be working in like a neuro-specific unit. So they'll be at a hospital with that specialty area. There's also therapists that will go on and get specialized in like lymphedema management. And I think your personal background helps you kind of guides where you're going to go. So you look at those things that you're passionate about, things you've had experience with, and things that make you feel good or happy about. And that's kind of where you end up choosing where you want to work. And as an occupational therapist, I don't think any of us really are like, I'm going to work, where it's like our career. Like that's what we all love to do. It's not a job. It's enjoyable, and we get to help people, and it's different than going to like work.
Yeah, absolutely. And that again hits on the vocational theme. And I guess the lesson there would be to stay open-minded. You mentioned that you didn't necessarily think you wanted to work with such a diverse population of patients, but you were open-minded enough and ended up really enjoying it. So back to our theme of change, clearly there was a change in attitude and mindsets for you. And so I guess that's what I'm trying to get kids to understand and encourage them to have a similar open mind.
Very important, because when we do fieldwork selections, we actually, people get upset because you don't get your first choice. Sometimes you're actually just placed whatever is like at a placement that's closer to your house. When I was a CODA, when I was going in with my associate's degree, I was set in pediatrics, and we only had 2 pediatric placements. So we actually had 4 people wanting that position. we had to interview for it. So I got really lucky, and I ended up getting it. And I think one of the reasons I got it was because I was so open and flexible about it. They had asked like what we would expect from it, and I said I am open to the experience. I mean, I will clean stuff if I need to. I'll just observe whatever I need to do. So I think that helped me get that placement. But I kind of kicked myself after that because I never did adults. So when I went back for my master's degree, I'm like, I want a position where I can see what it looks like to work with adults. So I was a little bit more open, but I was still nervous that it was a hospital. And my second placement was actually at HCMC in inpatient psych, which OT stems, like our background is mental health. What we can provide can help someone in with depression or help someone that's anxious. Like we help ground people and help them find things that make them happy. So I was a little nervous about HCMC too, just because I didn't have a huge background in that. But I'm so glad I had that experience because everything I learned there, I use in my job all the time. And it makes me a better therapist. Like we have people that come in that have Alzheimer's or dementia, and they can be hard to work with because you don't know how to respond to them in different situations and you don't want to upset them. But my background in that mental health area has really helped guide me. Like I can go into a room and feel comfortable seeing that patient and know how to respond, which is really helpful. And I know physical therapy in our team has definitely made note of that. If we have a patient like that, they're like, send in Ashlee from OT, she'll figure it out. So it's just, it helps everybody. But it's good to be open because you don't know what you're going to get. Same thing with the change. Like you just don't know what is going to come from it. And even if you hated the experience, you were like, I will never do that. You're still learning different things that are going to help you. And we call it like our therapy toolkit because you pick up little pieces from everyone you meet in therapy. Different coworkers have different experiences, different knowledge. And so you kind of pick up little pieces and you're like, yeah, I can use that in my therapy techniques. So it's cool in that aspect. But yes, being open is very important.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you connected occupational therapy and mental health. I'm not sure I would have made that connection on my own, but mental health in general is something that's really important to me and something I'm passionate about. And actually, that's what my mustache is doing, is starting to create conversations with people around mental health and specifically men during the month of November. So if you were curious, I don't always wear a mustache like this, but that's what it's there for. So thanks for making that connection, because now that I'm unpacking it on my own, I'm starting to think about how significant it could be if you were going through a significant physical therapy, occupational therapy, relearning some of those things that you probably took for granted, whether it's riding a bike or standing at your kitchen counter to make dinner. That could definitely impact somebody's mental health.
Mm-hmm.
So this question has a lot less depth, but it's fun to ask. What was your dream job? You're definitely passionate about occupational therapy, but was there something that you really dreamt about becoming as a high schooler or as a middle schooler?
Yeah, I wanted to fly planes. I actually, I almost joined the Navy. I actually went to school, kind of mixed in there. When I was in high school, originally I wanted to fly planes. So my parents actually bought me like a flying lesson, and I went up and flew a pretty small plane. I mean, I had the pilot flew it, and then I got to assist with it. And I was like, that's pretty cool. I could do that, I guess. Again, would have been work, not something I loved. And then my friend got in her car accident. So then I saw that and I was like, nope, that's 100% what I want to do. But then after I finished and got my associate's degree, and I was like first thinking about going back to grad school, I thought about it and I'm like, maybe I should join the Navy. So I actually went in and took the test and like really considered doing that option. One, because they help pay for school, and two, just a whole nother learning experience and getting to travel the world and see what other options are out there. I probably wouldn't have been a pilot because I don't see very well. My depth perception's not the best. But it was kind of like a connection again. When I went back, I was like, I could do OT in the Navy, get my master's degree while I'm in there, but also still be part of that. And again, doing another service for the Navy. But yeah, I'm really happy I went for OT. And that's kind of why I accepted to do this conversation today. Like when I got the email, I was like, oh my gosh, I hate talking in front of people or like talking in general. So I was like, I don't know if I want to do it. But I feel like advocating for OT, because no one talked about OT when I was in high school. That was not a thing. Like people were like, you can go to school to be a nurse, a doctor, just work out in the field. I mean, no one ever talked about OT at all. And so I feel like it's important for me to teach other people about it because it's such a wonderful field. And there's so many people that have the skills, that those soft skills, we want those people to be OTs because it's so important, and the patient care and just being able to work with diverse people and be understanding and accepting. And, we want those people. So I was
Yeah.
like, yes, I'll talk about OT.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you sharing all the things you've shared with us. And I know for sure there was one student who specifically has been asking to talk to an occupational therapist. So thank you for agreeing to do this,
Yeah.
because our trimester is almost coming to an end here. So next question on the list, we've talked a lot about change, and I really believe change is important, and being open-minded is important, and using it as a vehicle to make myself better. So that's why I always get a little conflict of interest when I ask about the future, because sometimes when you give an answer, you feel like you lock yourself into something like that. But I do think there's some learning that happens when you ask people where you see yourself in 1 year or 5 years or 10 years. So this is another typical job interview question. Where do you see yourself? I'll leave it open generally. Where do you see yourself in the future professionally?
I would like to stay with M Health Fairview. Like I said, I've had a few other jobs, and I know at this point what I want out of my career, and how I want um, basically my job to look. There's so many different management styles out there, just how a company or organization is. I love M Health Fairview. I love that they give back to the community. I love that they do things like this and reach out to the younger crowd, just to help and provide education. I would really like to be at M Health Fairview, but I would like to keep advancing my skills. I'd like to add a couple more clinical interventions to my toolbox. So adding feeding. I'd like to help with low vision evaluation. So helping people who can't really see very well learn the skills to cope and manage with that. I'd also like to take on students. So I am a little over a year out of school. So at this point, I can take on graduate students. And I'd like to take on students and really help them hone in on their skills and be that person that can like cheer for them, be that mentor that they need. And I'm really passionate about OT, so it's nice that I can give that to other people. So ultimately, I'd like to just be where I'm at, but keep adding more to what I can provide for people. And I'm also willing, if you have any students that have other questions or want to know more things, or just have someone to help them communicate that path to becoming an OT, I am always open to discuss that too.
Yeah, thank you for that. So there's one more question on the list here. So we're going to wrap things up here in a second. But if you could give these high school kids one piece of advice, keeping in mind they're going to high school in the middle of a pandemic, and they're in a health careers class, and some of them might end up in a health career, some of them might not. What would be one piece of advice you'd want to give to these kids, high school students?
I think just be flexible. Be flexible with staff, be flexible with yourself. There is no right or wrong way to do things. And I mean, that goes with anything, like your journey after high school, your journey in high school, your just choices you make in life in general. You have to let yourself be accepting of that and be flexible of the choices that happen or the things that happen to you. Because everything works out the way it's supposed to work out. I think when I was a high school student, I think I got stuck on like, I'll never do that. I'll never be able to do this. This doesn't work for me. And it's like looking back now, I'm like, oh my gosh, if those things wouldn't have happened, I wouldn't have been as strong as I was to keep fighting to do what I wanted to do. So just be flexible and be okay with certain things. Like things happen, you'll get there. I feel like that was a long one, but
Yeah. No, that's good advice. If you can think about things happening for you instead of to you, I think that's an important mindset switch. So this didn't happen to you; it happened for you to learn and to grow and to have a different experience. So I think that's really good advice. So we've been at this for more than an hour here, and usually that only happens when somebody's really passionate about what they do. So Ashlee, I really appreciate you sharing all the things you shared, and it's definitely okay that we talked this long, especially since you're really passionate. And like I said, it only happens that these conversations last this long when you really truly care about what you do. So thank you so much for sharing your journey with us and sharing your experiences. And this is the best part of this class. It's the most important part when we talk to these people. I'm I'm a health education teacher. I'm not necessarily working in healthcare or a health career. So the people that share their experience with us is the most valuable thing. So thank you.
yeah, thank you for having me. I feel like it's so important for people just to know what else is out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we're trying to do when we bring people in like this. Hopefully someday we'll get to actually have them back in person, and we'll get to come visit you at Fairview in the building, hopefully. Thank you one more time. I'm going to stop recording, but thanks again for showing up.
Yes, thank you for having me.